September. Sorry. So today the session is for alternative fuels. As you may know, it's a very important topic. So we have four presentations. First is will be done by Yasin Kaya, and the second is for Turgay Köroğlu, Mr. Turgay Köroğlu. Then the third one is Muhammed Umar Bayar, and the last one will be presented by Canberk Hazar. So the first presentation, because we have lost very many times, so that's why I want to start as soon as possible. The first presentation's title is "Do Shocks Have Permanent or Transitory Effects on MGO Bunker Prices?" And it will be presented by Yasin Kaya. He is from Ordu University. So I will just let the presentation begin. Again, welcome to our session, and we are listening to you.
Thank you very much. Let me introduce myself, first of all.
Yes.
My name is Yasin Kaya. I have been working at Ordu University, Department of Marine Transportation Engineering, as a doctoral research assistant for almost 1 year. Because we have just limited time,
yes.
I start my presentation. Yes. The topic of our study is that do shocks have permanent or transitory effect on MGO bunker price? This is content of my presentation. My presentation will not be last. It is not going to take your minutes too much. I want to start with introduction. Monitoring and forecasting changes in fuel price is very important for maritime transport stakeholders with regard to many aspects. Especially fuel price directly affects ship operators in terms of both ensuring profitability and environmental requirements. Many rules and regulations regarding the prevention of air pollution from ships came into force. One of the most important one is sulfur emissions, as well as you know. The sulfur emissions limit was reduced from 3.5% outside emission control areas to 0.5% after January 1, 2020. There are lots of negative effects because of sulfur emissions, as well as you know. We can give some example of this. Water-soluble SOx causes acid rain, which is harmful to the environment and people, damaged soil, cultivated areas, freshwater resource, and structures. We can add a lot of any other negative effects of this negative situation. To meet these stringent restrictions, ships now have to use low sulfur fuels or technologies that eliminate high sulfur from the use of fuel oil. There are some options to comply with this regulation, as well as you know. To ensure compliance with sulfur restrictions, the use of low sulfur fuel or installation of a scrubber system on ships, there are options. Also, different scrubber systems are available in the market to reduce sulfur emissions. The price difference between HFO, heavy fuel oil, and MGO influence the payback period of different scrubber types. Or some ship owners or some investors may not prefer to invest such a technology. And there are some any other measures to prevent SOx emissions, but their use are very limited. So there is no special emphasis on them in this presentation. At this point, estimating fuel prices and making investment plans accordingly become important. Investors or ship owners take into considerations some factors. These factors, such as price differences between low and high sulfur fuels, loading factors, freight rates, interest rates, investment costs, possible effects of government subsidies on scrubber installation, are taken into account. Sorry. It is stated that changing the fuel is the most appropriate option in a study. There are some studies which evaluate installation scrubber is good option or not good option. One of them, changing the fuel, is most appropriate option in a study. Current market condition of study and government subsidies are required for scrubber investment. In another study on the subject published in the same period, it is stated that the scrubber installation is more attractive investment, but it is also not that in that study the price of low sulfur decrease, the scrubber installation will lose its attractiveness. Third study in the literature, when the MGO price spread is less than 231 euros per ton, the use of MGO has higher net present value than scrubber installation, and the scrubber system is a better alternative for new vessels. There can be different results because of the period of time may be changed, may different, or the characteristics of fleet may be different in the scope of different studies. So, but we can conclude that the critical question is how fuel prices change the current market conditions. The reason for different results in terms of different studies is the use of different samples in terms of characteristic and navigational zones. Estimating MGO price and making decisions according to between alternatives that eliminate sulfur emissions have become very important. So here is the most important question that motivates our study. This study determines whether the effects of shocks in the MGO prices of major bunker provider centers in the world are temporary or permanent. The permanent effects of a shock, these shocks, by the way, can be political or economically maybe shock. The permanent effects of a shock show that the policies implemented and the shocks exposed to have permanent effects. In such a case, the series moves randomly and cannot be estimated using historical data. If we have permanent effect, we cannot make any prediction for future. The temporary effect of a shock shows that the effects of a policies implemented and the shocks exposed are temporary. The future values can be predicted using historical data. I want to talk about methodology and data. If we want to determine the shocks are permanent and transitory, we have to use some methods to determine that. One of the most common methods used in the literature to detect this is unit root test. Testing the unit root hypothesis allows to determine whether the shock, which a variable is exposed to, generates a permanent or a temporary effect. If it is determined that the series contains a unit root as a result of the applied test, this indicates that the shocks have a permanent effect. On the other hand, if it is determined that the series doesn't contain a unit root, this indicates that the shocks have temporary effect. What if we have determined that these series are stationary? It means that our series returns to average in long term. This shows that the implemented policies lose their effect by the time. We used that data set consisting of 8 bunker centers in our analysis. If there is a cross-sectional dependency, since this data set is panel structure, we should use one of the panel unit root test in panel datasets. If there is a cross-sectional dependency in the data, the analysis applied should be resistant to situation. Cross-sectional means that every single bunker centers, the price of MGO in every single bunker centers affect each other. So we have to choose a method that take into consideration the dependency, cross-sectional dependency. If otherwise, the results may be biased and inaccurate. Cross-sectional dependency means that the shocks in one variable spread to other ones, as I mentioned. To test the situation, we applied the Lagrange multiplier test, LM test, cross-sectional LM test, and LM adjusted test. According to the results, we determined that it is necessary to apply the second generation unit root test, because there is a cross-sectional dependency in the dataset. We applied 3 of them, LM, CD, LM, MLM adjustment test. All of them shows that there is a cross-sectional dependency. So every single bunker centers, the price of MGO at every single bunker centers affect each other. So the null hypothesis of tests can be expressed as the series contains unit test after determined cross-sectional dependency. Based on the result of the cross-sectional dependency and homogeneity test, bootstrap IP test developed. This is a new generation type of bootstraps. This test is a unit test resistant to cross-section dependency. The null hypothesis of the test can be expressed as that the series contains any unit root. It means OR series, the shocks in OR series are permanent. The data sets consist of 782 daily observations and covers the dates between 14 March 2017 and 13 March 2020. The included bunker centers are Fujura, Hong Kong, Houston, Istanbul, New York, Piraeus, Rotterdam, and Singapore. Figure 1, the graphical presentation of variables is presented in Figure 1. Since the most important factor affecting bunker price is oil price, there is a high correlation between them, as I mentioned. Other than that, the factors that cause price differences may arise from supply-demand situation, distance of suppliers, and location of other bunker providers in the region. We can see the fluctuation of fuel price in different bunker centers. We can see some shocks at the middle of between 2018 and 2019, at the beginning of 2020. There is a dramatic decrease of MGO prices. Descriptive statistics of or data sets are presented in Table 1. Changes in bunker price, I mentioned, may arise from different reasons. According to average prices obtained, the highest price are those of Fujura. 668. Second one is Istanbul, 623. Third one is New York, 612. If you look at descriptive statistics, mean values, the highest value is, as I mentioned, Fujura. Second one is Istanbul. So another important indicators on this table, standard deviation. The highest standard deviation in this table in Hong Kong. Second one is New York. So maybe a maximum minimum price of MGO is another important indicators, but standard deviation is gives this result, enough result for us.
Mr. Kaya, you have 4 minutes, please.
Okay. Findings in this slide. According to results we obtained, the null hypothesis of no cross-sectional dependence was rejected with all 3 tests. So as I mentioned, we have cross-sectional dependency. You can see at table 2 the p-value of all 3 tests. After that, since cross-sectional dependency is detected in the second generation method used in unit root analysis. In this respect, we choose bootstrap IPS test in our analysis. The null hypothesis of this test is that the series contain unit roots, and according to results we have obtained, the null hypothesis cannot be rejected at the level. So this C refers constant, C and T refers constant and trend. Even if we take into consideration trend, we can conclude that there is a unit root, so the shocks are permanent. As a conclusion, we determined the persistence of shocks in MGO prices, that shocks have permanent effects, that the policies implemented are effective, and that future values cannot be predicted using past values. In the data indicates that the bunker centers are affected by shocks from each other. The first difference was taken, the series became stationary. The panel data related to MGO bunker price was I1. This shows that the series is not stationary and the shocks in the series have permanent effects. The future values cannot be predicted using historical values. This makes difficult to forecast and make investments decisions about whether to invest in sulfur eliminating technologies. It shows that ship owners must take in an uncertain future perspective. What is the limitation of our study, and what kind of further research can be done? In future studies, it can be examined whether the shocks are permanent or temporary for other bunker types, maybe ultra low sulfur price or HFO. The biggest limitation of our study is related to data availability. We could collect data for about 3 years. If a longer data set can be obtained, more reliable and inclusive results can be reached. These are our references. Thanks for listening.
Mr. Kaya, thank you for your presentation. It was a very interesting topic. And is there a question from the audience or from the other participants? Okay, so I know that the price of the fuels is one of the most significant determinants in the future. And maybe just for an idea for you, maybe using advanced machine learning systems can help you to predict the future values based on the historical values. It's just an opinion from me. Thank you for your presentation again.